Imagine spending 7 years of your life driving around Florida in a white Ford Bronco selling fax machines door to door and getting rejected constantly and feeling like a complete failure and wondering if this is all your life will ever be, and then one day you cut the feet off your pantyhose because you hate how they bunch up at your toes and that stupid decision makes you a billionaire and the youngest self-made female billionaire in America, and you never take a single dollar from investors. And you keep 100% ownership of your company worth over $1 billion, and it all started because you were willing to sell fax machines when nobody wanted to buy them from you. This is Sara Blakely's story, and it's one of the most inspiring business stories you've never heard, because most people only know her as the Spanx lady, but I know that she failed at literally everything before that, and the failures made her who she is. Let us start at the beginning, because Sara Blakely was not supposed to be a businesswoman, and she definitely was not supposed to be a billionaire. And if you met her in her 20s, you would have thought she was going nowhere fast. She grew up in Clearwater, Florida, and her dad was a trial attorney, and every night at dinner he would ask her and her brother the same question, which was, what did you fail at today? And if they had nothing to report, he would be disappointed. And this sounds insane, but it was intentional, because he wanted to teach them that failure is not something to be ashamed of, and that the only real failure is not trying. And this lesson would define Sara's entire life. She wanted to be a lawyer like her dad, and she studied hard and took the LSAT twice and bombed it both times and didn't get into law school. And that was failure number one, and it crushed her because she had built her entire identity around becoming an attorney. So she pivoted and tried to work at Disney World because she thought maybe she could be a performer or work in entertainment, and Disney rejected her, and that was failure number two. Then she got a job at Epcot Center, where she dressed up in a giant chipmunk costume in the Florida heat for 3 months, playing a character and greeting tourists, and it was humiliating and exhausting, and she realized this was not her path either. At 25 years old, Sara Blakely had no career and no direction and no idea what she was good at, and then she got a job offer to sell fax machines door to door for a company called Donka, and she took it because she needed money and had no other options. This was 1993, and fax machines were becoming obsolete because email was starting to take over, and nobody wanted to buy a machine from a stranger knocking on their door, and especially not from a young woman in her 20s who had zero sales experience, and Sara spent 7 years doing this job and getting rejected constantly. But here's what's interesting about those 7 years, because most people would see that as wasted time, but Sara saw it as training, and she learned how to handle rejection, and she learned how to pitch, and she learned how to close deals, and she learned that persistence beats talent, and she learned that hearing no 1,000 times doesn't kill you, and all of those lessons would become critical later. She was good at the job too, because she became a top salesperson at Donka. And she made decent money, but she hated it because selling fax machines door to door was soul-crushing, and she knew this could be her life forever, and she started thinking about what she actually wanted to do. The problem was she had no business ideas and no unique skills and no money to start anything, and she was 27 years old, living in a small apartment in Atlanta, working a job she despised, and most people in that situation would just accept it and keep grinding. But Sara's dad had trained her to see failure differently. One day, she was getting dressed for a party, and she wanted to wear white pants, but she didn't like how her underwear lines showed through, and she didn't like how regular pantyhose had seemed, toes that bunched up, and open-toed shoes, and so she did something weird, which was she cut the feet off a pantyhose and wore them under her pants, and it worked perfectly. She looked in the mirror and thought, this is genius, and why doesn't this product exist? And she started researching and found that nobody made footless body-shaping hosiery, and she realized she might have stumbled onto something. Now, here's where most people would stop, because Sara Blakely had zero experience in fashion, and zero experience in manufacturing, and zero experience in retail, and zero business connections, and no money to invest, and she was working full-time selling fax machines, and had no idea how to start a clothing company, but she didn't let any of that stop her. She saved $5,000 from her fax machine sales job, and that was her entire startup capital, and she wrote her own patent. Because she couldn't afford a patent attorney, and she spent nights at Barnes and Noble reading books about patents and trademarks, and she filed it herself, and somehow it was approved. She cold-called hosiery mills in North Carolina, trying to find someone who would manufacture her product, and they all said no, because she had no experience and no money and no credibility, and they thought her idea was stupid, and one guy literally laughed at her and hung up. She called dozens of manufacturers and got rejected by all of them, and then weeks later one of the mill owners called her back and said he had talked to his daughters, and they thought the idea was great, and he wanted to help her, and that was the break she needed. She worked with him to develop the prototype, and she tested it on herself and her friends and kept refining it, and she came up with the name Spanx because she thought it was catchy and funny, and she trademarked it. Then she needed to get it into stores, and she had no retail connections and no sales team and no distribution, and so she did what she always did, which was she just showed up and tried, and she called Neiman Marcus and somehow got a meeting with a buyer. The buyer was skeptical, and Sara could tell she was unimpressed, and so, in a last-ditch effort, Sara asked the buyer to come to the bathroom with her, and the buyer thought she was insane, but agreed, and Sara put on the spanx in the bathroom stall and showed the buyer the before and after, and the buyer immediately understood and said yes, and Neiman Marcus agreed to carry spanx in 7 stores as a trial. This was the turning point, because if Neiman Marcus had said no, Sara probably would have given up, but they said yes, and suddenly she had legitimacy, and she launched in September 2000. And the first year she did $4 million in revenue, which is insane for a bootstrap product with zero marketing budget. How did she do it with no marketing money? And the answer is she hustled in ways nobody else would, and she would go to Neiman Marcus stores and stand in the hosiery section and talk to customers and hand out samples and explain the product, and she would convince them to try it, and then they would buy it and tell their friends. She also sent samples to Oprah's producers because she knew Oprah could change everything, and somehow Oprah loved the product and put it on her favorite things list in November 2000. And that appearance changed Sara's life overnight, because once Oprah endorsed it, everyone wanted spanx. Within a year, spanx was in major department stores across the country, and revenue was exploding, and Sara was running the entire company by herself because she refused to take on investors or partners, and she wanted to maintain complete control. By 2006, Sara Blakely was worth over $100 million, and by 2012, she was worth $1 billion. And she did it without ever taking a single dollar of outside investment, and she owned 100% of her company, which almost never happens. Most entrepreneurs take venture capital money and give away ownership and control, but Sara refused because she saw what happened when founders lost control of their companies, and she wanted to build spanx her way, and she was willing to grow slower to maintain ownership. At 41 years old, she became the youngest self-made female billionaire in America, and she had done it by solving a problem that everyone told her was stupid, and by persisting when everyone said no, and by bootstrapping with $5,000 when everyone said she needed millions. The 7 years selling fax machines had taught her everything she needed to know about rejection and persistence in sales and customer empathy, and none of that time was wasted because it prepared her for the harder rejections that came with building spanx. Here's what makes Sara's story different from most billionaire stories, because she didn't have connections, and she didn't go to an elite school, and she didn't have rich parents funding her, and she didn't have technical skills or business training, and she just had an idea and $5,000 and a willingness to get rejected over and over until someone said yes. She is also incredibly honest about the role of luck, because she admits that if that $1 million owner's daughters had even liked her idea, she probably would have given up, and if Neiman Marcus had said no, she might have quit, and if Oprah had even featured spanx, the growth would have been much slower, and she acknowledges that luck played a role, but she also created the opportunities for luck to happen. The lesson here is not that you should go sell fax machines door to door, although that would unheard, and the lesson is that your current job, even if you hate it, is teaching you skills you'll need later, and that failure is not permanent unless you stop trying, and that bootstrapping is possible even in industries where everyone says you need investor money. Sara Blakely proved that you don't need a business degree or venture capital or industry connections to build $1 billion company. And you just need to solve a real problem and persist longer than everyone else, and be willing to look stupid while you figure it out. She is still the CEO of spanx, and she still owns the majority of the company, even though she sold a stake to Blackstone in 2021, and she is worth over $1 billion. And she did it by cutting the feed off pantyhose and refusing to give up when everyone said her idea was dumb. So the next time you re-stuck in a job you hate or feeling like you're re-going nowhere, remember that Sara Blakely spent 7 years selling fax machines and getting rejected and feeling like a failure, and that experience didn't stop her from becoming a billionaire. And it actually prepared her for it, because failure is only permanent if you let it be.